I get asked, what am I all the time, right? I get asked, that people know, or a lot of people seem to know that I'm not just white, but they don't know what I am. People see my last name and ask me if I'm Hispanic, but my last name's Hungarian. So there you go. I'm half Chilean, so half Hispanic. My mom's Chilean. Came to Canada when she was 10, and my dad is, I guess, white for purposes of this conversation, but his parents came from Hungary and from England themselves. So.
My mother is Dutch and Scottish, so very white, and then my dad is from Nova Scotia, and his background comes from runaway slaves that ended up in Canada from the States. But they ended up on a native reserve. So I have like Métis in me as well.
I see myself as like half Hispanic and connecting to Chilean culture in particular, and half white, with this little caveat in my brain that, like, all four of my grandparents were first-time immigrants to Canada, and somehow in my own experience of myself, that's different. That's me saying, hey, no, don't just throw me in that white category, because that's an important part, I guess, of my heritage to me, is like the struggle that involved. I always get upset when they like how all these check boxes and you can only check one, because it's like, and it's like, well, so I check both when I say, but I also am really aware that I'm not a visible minority. Like I don't look like directly something else, right? And so, and that I'm aware, at least, that I'm seen as like tends towards Caucasian versus something else. So I check white more than I check if I had to choose one.
It's so crazy, like, talking about this and just seeing things now, how systemic this is. The fact that, like, we have to check boxes on race. That's insane. That's actually crazy. Like, why does that matter?
Right.
Like, what in what context does that make a difference? Other than a very heavily biased one. For someone to view me as an individual over the phone versus meeting me in an interview and seeing that I'm a black person, it's very different. And I have learned to do my very best to try to use it as an advantage, because there is this funny thing that you had mentioned about things from other cultures being more interesting. I think it's really unfortunate to come from a place where, and I completely agree with you when you said this, that white is standard. Because if we're looking at the actual population of the world, that's definitely not the case.
Yeah.
But for some reason, that seems to be the way that we look at things. And so for me to be, grow up in a place where it was predominantly white, I had to find things to make me interesting, where I had to capitalize on those opportunities instead of becoming just another minority. I was, look how well he's done despite the situation,
Wow.
And so that all comes from, for sure, a society that views you a certain way because of your race. And the more that I learn, and the more that I hear this, and it just seems so ridiculous that we use race to qualify people still. Like, if you want to explain your heritage, do it through ethnicity. Just the verbiage that I would use growing up to explain myself or talk about who I am in juxtaposed to the society that I live in. Just think little things like thinking that, white is the norm and I am an other, like just little nuanced ideas like that really end up seating themselves in who you become as an individual.
Kind of internalizing some of that.
Yeah, because you don't revisit the idea.
Right.
You just catalog it. So then it becomes
Just
part of
is.
you, and it just is, and then you build off of those rationales, right? So now going through this right now, it's really given me a good opportunity to open my eyes and see all the miseducation that's been going on, and try to find my through line, understand my heritage, understand my place as an individual. To be a Canadian, I mean, when people ask me what I think a Canadian looks like, I feel like I look like I'm Canadian. Like I feel like I am the poster child for a Canadian. I guess like I feel like I talk Canadian. I feel like I look Canadian. I feel like I act Canadian.
I think I grew up with my mom being an immigrant from Chile. I think I grew up with her pointing out the times where Canadian people mean Canadian to refer to white people who've been here for generations. You say Canadian, I think about Canadian citizen, right? To me, that's what that means.
That is what that means. 100%.
Thank you. And like for it to mean anything different, I think, and we're all caught in different biases about that for sure. But makes no sense. Like when you ask me personally, what do I think of when I think of Canadian? I think of like a group of people on the cover of a textbook, you know, like where they like pulled people on purpose to represent. There's definitely a black guy in there.
People, yeah.
There's definitely like a few different kinds of white people. There's definitely, people that look more like Asian immigrants, not even like Asian Canadians here for a long time, like Asian immigrants specifically. And like, that's what I think of this. And I think maybe that's partly what Canada wants the world and Canada to see as what is acceptable and okay. And that's part of this, like, oh, Canada's all equal and all nice and good, right? But to me, that's like, there isn't one person that is epitome of Canadian. Like,
it's a little bit reductionist, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's not reality.
So I agree totally with what you had to say.
Yeah.
Being Canadian means that you're a Canadian citizen. Yeah. When someone talks about the differences between different cultures, what comes to mind when you're talking about Canada?
Yeah. There was that, like, it's Canadian to be polite and not actually say what you think.
Sure, that's
for
that's a
example,
Canadian thing.
right?
Yeah.
That's what people in our language we talk about as Canadian, which is interesting. I think at least that's an unhelpful word usually, because interesting, what does that even mean? But like there's certain norms, I guess, around things. But yeah, sometimes that bothers me. That's like, oh well, I guess it's like Canadian are proper to pretend I like this thing when I really don't, right? Or to I don't know, abstain from using my voice, right? Or whatever it is. I think Canada, as this like national, whatever that means, tries really hard.
I think they have a very inclusive narrative.
They want to be seen, or they do things to, again, Canada is this big authority, Canada, I guess, like to try to portray that. I think sometimes done pretty poorly, or like that's not the case in reality, that happens all the time, obviously, or even most of the time. But
I think so, like when we're talking about the education, like when we learned in school, I think that speaks a lot of volumes to like what Canada means. Like when I was learning about Canada, like I learned a little bit about natives, and then they were washed out, and it was how Europe colonized this place. Right. And that's kind of, I feel like that, like it seems silly, but that's what you're taught, so that's what you know, and that's what it is. So I guess for me, Canada, just seems like it tries to have an inclusive narrative.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about this whole thing about being a Canadian, and until now, neither of us had mentioned about Indigenous people.